Happy Wednesday, everybody. Thanks for joining me for an author's afternoon in the locker room. I'm Alan Locher. Martha Bolton, who was the first woman staff writer for Bob Hope, helping to write his television specials, personal appearances, and military shows for approximately 15 years, is here to discuss Dear Bob, Bob Hope's wartime correspondence with the G.I.s of World War II. Martha wrote the book along with Bob Hope's daughter, Linda Hope. The book is a time capsule that reveals exactly how important Bob's remarkable service was to the fighting men and women of World War II. The authors have collected personal letters, postcards, packages, and more sent back and forth among Hope and the troops and their loved ones back home. This unforgettable collection of letters and images, many of which remained in Hope's personal files throughout his life and now reside at the Library of Congress, capture a personal side of both writer and recipient in a very special and often emotional way. This volume heralds the voices of those servicemen and women whom Hope entertained and who, it is clear, delighted and inspired him. I am so happy Martha is here today to share her memories of the late Bob Hope and tell us about this wonderful new book. Please welcome to the locker room, Martha Bolton. Hey, Martha. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be on your show. Oh, well, it's my pleasure.
I appreciate it. You know, we were just talking a little backstage. Congrats on the new book.
Thank you.
It's such a really great idea. But before we dive into the book and your relationship, I wanted to learn more about you. You know, you have written 88 books of humor and inspiration. So when I say 88 books, what comes to mind for you?
Tired hands. It's hard to believe myself. I still remember when I wrote my first one, and the first one came out in the mail, and how excited I was, and then it was just, one after another, and before you know it, you turn around and look, and you've got 88.
88. So. What was the first book?
It was called A Funny Thing Happened to Me on My Way Through the Bible, and it was a collection of skits that churches could perform.
Oh my God,
that was the first book,
name.
And then that started it all.
Wow!
And then just kept adding to it.
I would love to know what your journey to becoming a writer has been like. Was it something from an early age?
Yes, I've always loved to write. I could go back as far as 9 years old. I wrote a little book called No Fun Being Young, and it was about being the youngest of 5. And then I wrote poetry at 12 and would tape it on the wall next to my bed. And I had about 35 poems up there. And then at 14, I entered a gag writing contest to come up with the caption to a cartoon, and the newspaper printed it. And so I can look back and see all the steps all along the encouragement that I was getting. And
yeah, that's really important to say, because you must have, because 9, 14, you have these clear memories.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember I was probably 12. I remember my pastor reading one of my poems from the pulpit, and I didn't even know he was going to do that, and that excitement when you hear it. But I ended up writing. I became a church secretary, and then I ended up doing a lot of comedy. I would do plays that had comedy and drama. And then I also would roast the pastor like the Friars Club.
Yeah.
And I got a reputation for doing that. And then I would get invitations from other churches to go roast their pastor. And then people started telling me, you should be writing for Hollywood, So I, with that encouragement, I had never thought about doing it as a profession. It was always going to be a hobby. But I started sending my work out to different comedians, and sure enough, they started buying. And I then wanted to go into script writing for like a sitcom. And I had read a book by a gentleman named Gene Parrott, and he was a staff writer for Carol Burnett and the creative consultant on Mama's Family. And I loved both of those shows. So anyway, I wrote him
100%, me too.
Oh, yeah. And so I wrote him a letter and didn't ask for anything. I just told him that we had a lot in common because we both wrote for Phyllis Diller. I had been, writing for her at that time.
I saw that. I was
going to
ask you about that.
So we both wrote for her, and then he also roasted the people at his work. So we had that in common as well. So I just wrote a nice letter, and then he wrote me back, contacted me and said, invited me to see a taping of Mama's Family. So I went down there. Long story short, afterwards, we went out to eat. And I had my scrapbook, this huge scrapbook that I had of all, by then I was doing a newspaper column, and then I had the jokes that I had written for people and magazine articles and things like that in it. And he was looking through it, and then he said, yeah, you really need to be on a sitcom or working for something.
Was it was it the roasts that actually, is that where your comedy began?
That's where my timing, and it was a lot like Bob Hope's humor, and I didn't realize the fit that it was going to be. Plus the fast writing. I once wrote a roast on the way to the banquet, so I had trained myself to write quickly, and so Gene then suggested that I write a couple of spec scripts, but at the time, my typewriter wasn't working at home. And for a quarter for 20 minutes, I went down to the local library and kept feeding it quarters, a whole bunch of quarters, and wrote up 2 spec scripts. He got it to Ed Simmons, who was the producer. And Ed loved it and then said he was going to call me in the next season to pitch some show ideas. And then what happens in Hollywood, the show didn't get picked up at that time. It later did, but at that time it didn't. And then Gene called me and asked me then, he said, how would you like to try out for Bob Hope? And I about dropped the phone. And so He gave me an assignment. He got it. He was at that time also writing for Bob. So he got the material to Bob. And one night, about 11 o'clock at night, the phone rings and it was Bob Hope. And he told me he loved my work. And that started it. He just kept calling, and I eventually came on staff and was his first woman staff writer. So.
Okay, so we're gonna come back to Bob in a minute. What was there a book or an author or a comedy writer that had a great impact on you growing up?
Oh, growing up, oh my goodness, Jerry Lewis. My sister and I would go down to the theater, and we'd watch every Jerry Lewis movie that ever came out. I loved the Honeymooners. I loved all of the comedians. I collected comedy albums. So I had everybody's comedy album. And I just would listen to it over and over. And I thought that I was just enjoying their work, but I was getting an ear for the cadence, the rhythm of a joke. And it just was all getting inside me for what I was eventually going to do. I didn't know it, but yeah.
It's incredible. And you not only, you write for Bob's television shows, but you write books, music, plays. Is there one out of all of that you find the most joy in?
Well, I love all of it. I think they're all what I have done that makes my life fun is that I'll do one thing for a while, and then when that deadline is met, the next thing I do is a different kind. I'm still doing comedy, but a different kind. And then I'll move on to the next thing. And that's the way it was with Bob as well, because he would call up with topics for the monologue. Then we'd meet and pitch sketch ideas, and we'd work on the sketch. And then he'd call, and sometimes this is in the same day, these different phone calls, and you're having to change gears really fast. Then we do song lyrics, a parody.
Yeah.
And then we do a tribute that somebody had died, and you had to do it, write a serious tribute with some humor in it. But so it was always different kinds. So
you were on your, on your toes all the time. You
yeah,
were
you had
ready
to
to
be.
go. But you
Yeah.
said the first phone call, you got a phone call late at night from
Yeah.
Bob. Can you take me back? Do you remember the first time you met in person?
Yeah, I had to do some thinking about that, because my first connection with him is always to that phone call. But I do remember, and it was at one of the tapings, and I was so excited to finally get to meet him. We had talked on the phone, but this was when we were going to meet in person. And I still remember what I was wearing: a black skirt and a white top with a red belt, and walked down. In fact, it was Gene that led me over there to meet him. And so I was up in the audience seats. Not, the audience wasn't in there, it was rehearsal, but walked down and then went over and met him. And from then on, it was, you were just always there. And if, going into his dressing room, if he needed a line change, and he ran in an amazing crowd. So if you had a line change, you could walk into his dressing room and here you're delivering the line that that you came up with. And, Bob's in his makeup chair, and then they're across from him is seated often would be like Lucille Ball or Milton Berle, Danny Thomas, and you're just like these legends of comedy, and they're waiting for you to give this line to them. So it's very intimidating.
I wouldn't have been able to speak.
Yeah, I got a lot of encouragement from the other writers because I tend to be shy, and they would always, you go on, you say it, and
Wow.
And we're real encouraging that way.
What was he like in person, and what was he like as someone to write for?
He wasn't demanding, but his schedule was demanding. So even if he could be as nice as he can be, but you still had to get the work turned in.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And he, you were expected to get it done. He never said an unkind word to me in 15 years. So that's, talk about a dream assignment. And he was just a gracious, kind man who had an incredible and incredibly demanding career. So we were his support system that way, part of it. And we had, if he got an assignment, if he had to go, or what happened a lot is if he got to a venue and found out something was going on in the town that he was in, then he'd call you up at all hours and, want something to talk about. Yeah, this is happening. Give me something on this, and you'd have to, sometimes you had 5 or 10 minutes to phone it back to him before he's walking onto the stage.
That's
so
incredible.
It was a lot of pressure that way.
And you were his first full-time female staff writer.
Yes, yeah.
Females in this industry, I assume you realized this at the time. Was it, two things, sort of, did you realize it at the time, like the impact of being the first, and what was it like in probably a male-dominated space?
Yeah. I didn't totally realize it at the time until I later was told that. But it was, totally males around me, which I found it to be, they never treated me different. They always treated me, my work was as good as theirs. And we would call each other up and tell our jokes to each other, and they'd laugh at mine and I'd laugh at theirs. And we were really a team, and a very supportive team, very kind to each other. We love to laugh. Every time we'd tape a show at NBC, we'd all go out to dinner together, lunch together. We just hung out together and we're on the phone together. He'd have parties. We'd all go there. And it was a great work environment. It really was very encouraging.
That's awesome. And as a staff writer, you sort of said you had the opportunity to write for a who's who in entertainment, sports, and politics.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look back, can you name one or two that, you pinched yourself that you were writing lines for?
Well, all of the legends. I mean, because he had the legends on this show, so he had the up and coming, which were exciting. Those were always exciting. But when you saw the stars that you grew up with, and you knew the magnitude of their careers, and they're sitting there 2 feet from you, that was just incredible. And they're coming up to you off the side of the stage and saying jokes in your ear, and it was unbelievable. You really were pinching yourself when that, and then some of his events that he would attend, and he'd often get the writers. He'd have a table, so he'd invite the writers to go with him, and so we'd go to these events with political, the highest of the political scene, and to be sitting there at Bob's table, and there a few feet from you is, our presidents or this or that,
Wow.
and it's pretty incredible. This one banquet I remember, I got to sit right next to Bob, and I was so excited, and I didn't, I thought it was so nice of the other writers to let me sit there. And then I realized what it was about is that during the banquet, Bob would lean over to you and say, "Get me a line on whatever was happening," or whatever, the MC had just said or something. So all during this fabulous meal, you're sitting there having to write, and
Sweating.
they're all enjoying, they're enjoying their dinner, and so it was a private joke between all of us, it's like, oh, it's her turn now, But yeah, he ran in a great company of people.
A great circle.
Yeah.
You mentioned Phyllis Diller earlier and writing for her. Bob, Phyllis, what was Phyllis like? Must have been a hoot.
Oh, she was hilarious, but she was also so encouraging from the get-go, from the start. She would write little notes next to my jokes, and just dynamite, or great one, or this or that, and she was just really encouraging that way. And we took her out to dinner, and she's obviously hilarious to be spending a meal with, and I'd go to her house, and she was so sweet. She was just a wonderful, wonderful lady, and a groundbreaker for female comedians.
Yeah, seriously. Well, let's get into Dear Bob. How did Bob's relationship begin with the USO? I know he did it for so many years.
Well, Al Capstaff, his producer, and at the time, Bob, was a well-known radio personality, and he had, come off of Broadway, so he was a well-known star. And Al suggested that he take his radio show to March Field, and Bob wasn't sure. He was already having all the big stars of the day and whatnot were coming on his radio show, and he wasn't sure what he was going to talk about there, but he agreed to do it. And what he didn't know was Al's brother was stationed at that camp too, so that had a little bit of
right. That was a personal connection.
Yeah. So anyway, Bob does it, and he just fell in love with this audience because they were great. The responses, the cheers, the laughter, and he fell in love with this audience. But America at that time wasn't in the war yet. But soon after, later that year, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, then everything started happening, and he wanted to join the military when war broke out, and we were getting involved. Roosevelt had got started, and he wanted to enlist, but Roosevelt felt that his talents would be better served keeping the morale of the G.I.s up, and So Bob agreed to that, but I'm sure Roosevelt had no idea of who he was getting to fulfill that job. He thought it was just for World War II, but Bob Hope took it deeper than that and longer than that. And he went for 50 years, all the way. His last military show was when he was 87 years old. And he's climbing in and out of helicopters. He's going on stage and ducking the same, income bombs behind him, all of that. Throughout that 50 years, he was doing all, going right up there, putting himself in harm's way. And I don't think Roosevelt saw it, that it was going to be a 50-year commitment,
Right.
but Bob sure made it.
Basically a lifelong commitment. Wow.
Absolutely.
You wrote the book with Bob's daughter, Linda. What prompted you at this time together to think this was the right time? And also, because these letters have been around for so long, why was it this moment in time?
Well, that's an interesting story. We started this when Bob was alive. And Linda grew up with the letters. They were in the home office. And she even did a high school report on the letters. And thanks to Marjorie Hughes, who was his secretary at the time, she had kept them, with the original letter from the soldier and then Bob's response back to her on a lot of times the onion skin paper, and they, with the carbon copies and all of that. And so that was her connection with them. And then I got to see them when I was working on a project, and I couldn't believe the historical significance plus the peek into Bob's heart. It comes across in those letters, the soldiers' letters to him, his letters back. So I talked to Bob about it, and I said, have you ever thought about putting those into a book? Because I thought it would make a fabulous book. And he loved the idea, but he was so close to the letters that he didn't think he could get through them again. So he suggested I talk with Linda. And so I did. We had meetings and we started working on it and got quite a distance into it, reading the letters and making selections and doing some of the work. And then what happens in Hollywood is, you get on other deadlines that you have to meet and whatnot. And so we never forgot about it, but it kept sitting there and we'd add to it. But then Bob passed away, and I didn't know where the book stood at that time. And I had never given up on it, nor had Linda, but I just didn't know where it stood. So a few years ago, she contacted me and said, would you like to get back on that book? And I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. So we started working on it. By this time, the letters were up at the Library of Congress. So I would go up there and finish the research, and then I'd work on the manuscript. I'd send it to Linda. She'd send it back with great suggestions, and then I'd work on it again, and we went back and forth and back and forth. And then the University Press of Mississippi got on board, and it was going to come out in 2020, but because of all the COVID and events getting canceled, so it came out in March of this year.
And 2020 was the 75th anniversary
Exactly.
of the end of World War II. So
right, and that's what we were shooting for. But it came out in March, and I think in 2021 we are all looking for hope even more than we did last year. So I think it's perfect timing, and Bob was always known for his perfect timing. So I think he's still doing it.
I love that. That's a great. I assume you watched his relationship in some ways, right? With the servicemen and women over the years. What was it like for you to watch, that relationship?
Well, that was what was so fascinating, because sometimes, the veterans would come on the show, and then I think my battery's getting low. Just a second. the veterans would come on the show, and
Mm-hmm.
and we'd see him interact, but until I started reading these letters, then I really saw how deep that connection was.
I did I lose you?
I'm
No,
not
there you
sure. I
are.
think.
I hear
Oh,
you.
it's
Yeah,
okay. My
I hear
bat.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the letters really are as relevant today as they were when he began entertaining the troops 80 years
Right.
ago, as well as 75 years ago when the war came to an end. Can you talk about some of that?
The letters.
Yeah,
I
the
think.
relevancy of the letters. Yes. Hello? Uh, Martha, did you freeze? I know she said she had to plug in her computer. I wonder if she lost power. Let's give her a second to see if she comes back. I'm going to kick her out of the studio. Is everyone getting ready for Thanksgiving? I hope you are. I hope everybody who's watching has a really great Thanksgiving. I am fascinated by this book. I'm going to read a letter that one of our servicemen wrote to Bob later on in the show and read Bob's response to that same serviceman. Oh, camera lady just said, I don't remember where, but my dad met Mr. Hope twice on his USO work. An escort for him met him one more time. Uh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I don't think I've ever seen Bob Hope in person. And I think I just noticed that Bob lived till he was 100 years old, if I have that right. That's incredible. His last USO was when he was 87. Incredible, right? 100 years old. I hope someday I can live till I was 100. I don't know. I hope Martha comes back. Martha, I hope you come back. Let's see if she comes back. I hope she does. Any questions, folks? Thanks for watching, everybody. I thought this was a fascinating book. Great idea for a book. And Martha is correct. We all do need hope right now. We need something positive, and Bob was a positive light in this world. I mean, entertaining the troops for over 50 years is an incredible accomplishment. Incredible. I'm hoping Martha comes back. I don't know what happened. Oh, I have so many more questions. Any questions, folks? Thanks for sticking with me while we figure this out. Same to you, Patrick. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I'm ready for some turkey. Ready for some good Thanksgiving food. I hope Martha is going to try. Going to try texting. Give me a second here, see if I can do this. I might mute you all for a quick second. Let's see what happens. Trying another number, so bear with me. Let's see if we can get Martha back. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, there you are.
There you are. Thank you, Martha. Sorry about that. I just called Harlan, so if your phone rings, forgive me.
Okay.
And he had,
Oh, I see. It's
yeah.
ringing right now.
All right.
Should I take it or not?
Yeah, if you want to tell him, tell him we're
Okay.
fine. Sorry, everybody. Don't you love technology? Technology is great. Okay. Great. So,
Luckily,
was it the power? The power had gone out?
yeah, the battery did. I don't know if the earbuds were helping drain it, or I don't know what happened, but it had a full charge. So I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was winging it.
Oh, good.
I was winging it. How far back do the letters go in the book?
Well, it goes all the way to the start of the war, and actually before it, because there's some that took place when he went to Alaska before it started. So yeah, and then it goes all the way to even beyond the end of the war. It's showing that Bob continued to be there for the troops even in peace. So there's some letters that continue asking for his help for different things for the G.I.s, and of course he'd always do it.
Had you ever traveled with him on the USO tours?
No, I at the time I had 3 little kids, and so we'd go on location a few times, and they came. The troops came to his house in Palm Springs, and we did a show there. And so I went to that, but even when he was in different countries or in the war zones and whatnot, he would always call from there. So
I need a line.
even if you weren't there in person, you were still working on the shows.
That's incredible. That is really incredible. Can you talk about the letters, postcards, packages that he had and that are at the Library of Congress?
Well, at the height of the war, Bob was receiving 38,000 fan letters a week. So you can imagine what the house looked like with all these letters, and they were kept in boxes, like banker boxes.
Yep.
And then he donated them to the Library of Congress. But the letters run the gamut from there's the funny letters from the G.I.s, and they would swap jokes with him or send him souvenirs, or just they just had this relationship, kind of like a brotherly relationship, and they would joke around. And then there's the letters of where they're missing their moms, the letters of longing for a sweetheart and missing their wife or sweetheart back home. And then there's letters of I won't be home for Christmas. Those are all of those. And then the letters from the patients that when he would walk through the hospital wards, and there's lots of letters from that. And then also from parents or wives of or husbands of G.I.s that had gotten killed. So
how many letters and notes do you think you read as you prepared this?
Thousands.
Wow.
Thousands.
Is
Yeah.
there one that, possibly stands out in your mind or
Well, there's so many that that I love that choke me up every time I
oh, I
um,
probably would cry like a baby.
oh, and it's often it's just a sentence that jumps out at you and you go, oh my, they're so raw. Their feelings are so raw, and they wrote to him from either their hospital bed, sometimes in traction, sometimes. I apologize for my handwriting, but I'm up in an upside down position in the hospital ward, or my head, my face is all bandaged. And,
Right.
just so many, and they tell him what condition they're in. And so there's those, and those would always get to me. But I do have my favorites that just you love to. You have to have the tissue nearby, but I love the funny ones too. The funny ones, just because him, and his life was all about humor.
Mhm.
And what
Well,
comes across,
and his humor helped
oh yeah,
them.
oh absolutely, and it's letter after letter after letter that says that. If it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have held on. If it wasn't for, one guy credits him for saving his life because he was up in a plane and they were running into trouble, and the pilot had just before had contacted him in the back of the plane, and he had passed out, the one that had written the letter, and the pilot was trying to tell him a joke that Bob Hope had just told, that they had seen him tell, and he was trying to pass this joke along. And had he not called him back to tell him a Bob Hope joke, he would have died because he has passed out back there, and the oxygen was, going. So he says, "You saved my life. Your joke saved my life." So it's letter after letter of those kinds of stories, that the power of humor, and
Yeah.
sometimes the soldier didn't want to go to the show, and then they would write and say, "I almost didn't go because I was so tired, I was so frustrated, I was sick with different whatever diseases," and then they ended up going, and they were so glad that they had gone because it just gave them a whole new outlook, and just the power of humor. And Bob understood that. He learned right away how much humor was important to these young kids, and that was his rule, unspoken rule, that the entertainers, the troupe that he would take with him, that they wouldn't let the soldiers see him cry. They could cry when they got out of the hospital and got outside, but their job was to make them laugh, was to give them a moment of where they didn't have to think about their condition, and that was their job. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that leads me. So I'm going to read two letters. One from
Okay.
one of our U.S. Marine Corps men, and Bob's response. So this is
Wonderful.
from United States Marine Corps, May 21st, 1946. Dear Bob, this is just a few lines to you from an ex-Marine who really appreciated the show you put on for us in August of 1944 while I was in Ward Number 3 in Base Number 3 Hospital. I had just come from Guam on a stretcher a couple days before you and your troop arrived. And I mean, I really appreciated the way you acted. Some of the boys thought you looked good in that Panama hat and the cane. So did I. The thing that I liked about you was you weren't stuck up the way some of the actors are. You probably don't remember me. I had got it with a grenade on D-Day, July 21st, 1944 at Guam. And then I fought on till the 26th. And then I got my right shoulder smashed out with a 91.5 mortar. You sat on my bed and talked with me for a while. You probably forgot me by now. You told me to write you when I got the time. Well, I waited long enough. I know, but I was in the hospital for 1.5 years, from July of 1944 to January 1st of this year, 1946. I was listening to your program tonight over the radio, and I remembered what you told me and thought I would drop you a few lines. I've been sick with malaria for the past week, and I'm in bed now. Many thanks, always your friend, Eddie E. Jolly, 4 times wounded in action. And here's a letter, June 11th, 1946, to Mr. Eddie E. Holly. Dear Eddie, I'll never forget you fellows who were out there at Espiritu Santos in 1944, especially those in the hospital. That was surely something. Sorry to learn you're still suffering from wounds you received in action. 4 times is more than enough. Here's hoping that being back home will help to speed your recovery. Must close now as I'm on a tour and only drop by home to pick up my mail. Best wishes for a quick return to good health. Sincerely, Bob Hope. I mean, you just feel that connection between both.
Exactly.
And when you said it earlier, and one of our viewers, repeated it below in the viewer comments. I mean, it is incredible to think that Bob received 38,000 letters a week.
I know. And each one of those, they took the time, they would sometimes think about, well, I need to write Bob. I need to write him and thank him. I need to write him and thank him. And that's over and over in the letters. And they finally sit down and they go, I'm going to do this. I'm going to tell him what he meant to me. And thank God they did write, because the stories that we've got are just incredible.
Well, to think this letter that I just read was written in May of 1946, and that gentleman was injured on D-Day, in 1944. And, it was seeing Bob, or hearing him on, that he was, it reminded him to send him that letter, because Bob had told, which is really, that's a, to think of, that as well, because, this letter, or this gentleman was injured in 44, and the impact, of meeting Bob in 44, and then in 46 for him to be still thinking of Bob, and Bob's words being in his mind. That speaks to the impact Bob made on their lives.
Absolutely. And when we would meet World War II veterans at the shows, they have never forgot. They took it up all the way to the end, and even today, those that are left just praise Bob Hope that he kept them going.
Well, I love what you said earlier too about what he would say to his troop traveling with him. All smiles while they're looking at us.
Exactly.
And if you need to cry, you do it after, which is, I mean, I don't know the right word, but I mean, it's really smart, really insightful of Bob to be thinking that way, because they need, they need to see smiles on people's faces rather than anything else during.
Exactly. And I'm sure, he would get those letters, and when they would write those things, like, I heard you coming down the hall, but I wasn't sure, what, and then what, what you were going to say. But then when you said, don't get up, and don't get up, fellas. And he said, this one soldier said, I couldn't even gotten up if I had wanted to. But the fact that you said that just made me laugh. And it brought it out more than crying or anything else. I mean, the emotion, I'm sure, was felt by both sides, but they just, they wanted that brief time to be able to laugh instead.
I assume you could do a whole other book.
Oh yeah, several of them, I'm sure. There was so much. It was hard. That was the hardest part of the book, was deciding which ones to use. And there's, I would, it could fill a lot.
Yeah, it's a random question, but do you know if any of the servicemen you feature in the book are still with us?
Well, we're hoping to be hearing from some of them that, and we're hoping that enough of the
Or their families get to see
exactly,
it. Yeah.
and different ones are writing and saying, well, I wonder if my loved one ever wrote to Bob. Can you see if he ever wrote to Bob, and that type of thing. So it's kind of sparked this new interest in their relatives and seeing, if they had attended a show or had written to them.
Can anyone go to the Library of Congress as well if they, if let's say, a family didn't see it in the book and they were curious to know if Bob had ever written? Can anybody?
Yeah, I think there is a process that you have to kind of go through to do the
access,
research. Yeah. So, but if they write us, we try to see if we can find that out for them. But it's exciting just to see them. These people that lived, these people that gave their lives, and then to hear their words, and at the moment in time when, they were giving the most that could be asked of them to give. I mean, they were, and what their frame of mind was like, and just so united, so everybody was on the same team to get through this. So it's pretty fascinating.
Right. And like Eddie, I mean, so many of them suffered injuries, serving our country. And, some of them in particular got to meet Bob because of those injuries, because of the hospitals he visited. So
right. It's unthinkable circumstances that many of them were in.
How did he go about responding to these letters? I mean,
well, they meant, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a daunting task, and it's almost like a life calling for him, 50 years.
I think it was. I think, like I said, when in 1941, when he did that first show, he loved the audience, but I think they became such a part of his heart and a part of his life that it really was like a calling, that if the troops were going to be there, he was going to be there. That was his commitment, and he kept it up. And that it's admirable on both The Greatest Generation and on Bob Hope, and really his family as well, because they sacrificed as well.
I mean, it must be something for Linda to read these, to know the impact her dad had on.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
No.
Gosh.
I mean, it's.
Yeah.
She might have seen less of her dad, but when she looks at this, it's got to be give her a warm feeling to know what accomplished. For
it's amazing.
It's a sacrifice. The men were the men and women serving our country are sacrificing, but it was a sacrifice he made as well. Absolutely,
and it wasn't for notoriety. It wasn't for money. It wasn't because he already had all that. He didn't need it. He could have retired and lived a very good retirement, doing whatever he wanted to do. But at 87, like I said, he's still out there. I can't think of an 87-year-old that would go into a war zone,
Get on a helicopter. There aren't many.
Yeah. So he took that commitment, and she can and is, I'm sure, just blown away by the difference that her dad and their dad, all the kids, their dad made in the world.
Yes.
And I can't get over the fact that it was one man that made this kind of a difference. And that's all it takes is one person. And for his time, it was Bob Hope.
You know, and he smiled. He didn't let them see, you know, it affect him. He you know, just a response. You know, if people really realize that, you know, a response to a letter means the world to someone.
Oh yeah, and it wouldn't just, you know, be a treat for that one soldier, but when he would take it, you know, back to his tent or
right, yeah.
Soldiers would follow him and they'd all follow. And then the letter got passed around. So each letter represented, you know, what, 50 to 100 people getting it passed around. So it just helped so many people. And he took the time to do it.
Yeah. And I hope people please go out and read this book and share it, because it is that reminder. Look at what one person did for thousands of people serving our country.
Exactly.
Serving our country around the world.
Yeah.
Not just here at home, but around the world.
Oh, I know. And there's letters in there from the Allied forces. I mean, he just spread his goodwill and hope and laughter to everybody.
Amazing. You mentioned you have 3 children. Have they followed mom in down this path of writing?
Well, they have talent there, and you know, you never know. You never know, you know, what doors will open and what they may do in the future, or grandchildren. Who knows?
What's the one piece of advice you'd give somebody who's watching today, who, you know, listening to your path would want to follow, you know, in your path?
Well, the number one piece of advice is never give up. I've had so many things that looked like it had fallen through, and then it all it did was take me on a path that was even better. So if you get rejected or it falls through, you know, don't stress. Something else is, you know, waiting for you around the corner. Just don't give up. And then while you're not giving up, continue to work on your craft, because, you know, sometimes people want it, they'll have the desire, but they don't do the work that's required. And you have to do the work. You have to keep improving. Even after 88 books, I still keep improving. I keep reading and learning more about writing and trying new things. So it's a lifelong school, and it's a lifelong journey of wherever it takes you. And there's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be highs and lows, and you don't give up.
And are you teaching?
I have taught in different settings and whatnot, and I enjoy teaching young writers or up and coming people that want to write, or even professional writers. You know, just sharing what I've learned, and I enjoy it. Yeah,
that's great. Who are some comedy writers that you admire today?
Well, there's so many that I love. I like Jerry Seinfeld, of course, and then different one. I like the shows. Some of the shows that I really thought were really good, and it goes back a little ways, like Jerry Seinfeld. But I loved the Everybody Loves Raymond. I thought was really well written show. I really liked that, and I just love comedy. I'll listen to a comedian, and then sometimes it's hard for a comedy writer because sometimes you're analyzing each joke and, you know, well, they should have done this or they should have done that, you know. But I love the ones where I just get lost in their routine, or if they come up with a new angle of something that nobody's thought of, and you just think, oh, that's crazy, that is wild. I love that, whatever.
Do you
Those are the
watch some
things
of
I look for.
Do you watch some of like the Netflix comedy specials or things like that?
Sometimes it depends. I get so busy on projects and things, but I do try to watch videos. I'll watch a lot of go through YouTube and watch some of the
That's a good
comedians and yeah.
Good place for that. Is there a next project that you're working on?
Well, I am. I've got several ideas. I write musicals as well, and so right now I'm in the middle of a new script. But I would like to do a follow up to this book, and what it'll take. The shape it'll take. I'm still working on, but I did enjoy it, and Linda and I both enjoyed it very much. So we'll see.
And it's going to make an impact on a lot of people.
Yeah, that's what's so nice is he left so many messages, but some really powerful messages, and especially that don't wait a day to try to better the world.
He left a legacy. I mean,
yeah,
incredible. Well, dear Bob Hope's Wartime Correspondence with the G.I.s of World War II is available where all books are sold. Martha, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too. I appreciate
nice to meet
it.
you. Okay.
Well, you too.
Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Martha Bolton for joining us today. Please check out the book. Join me next Wednesday when Christian LeBlanc sits down with me to celebrate his 30th anniversary on The Young and the Restless. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel down below. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you all for your support and for watching. And please stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.